Hey, babe.
I'm Kathy Judson with Friends of the Police Ranger District.
And I'm John Krebs. I'm a retired Forest Service employee. I spent 30 years on the Police Ranger District. And very much interested in the Upper Lochsa, proposed Upper Lochsa land exchange. We're just kind of talking off the cuff here about some of the things that, how we got involved in this. To begin with, having been retired in 1995, and this not happening until 2008, I think, when 2009, when we first got wind of it, although there had been work being done on it for since 2006. I guess the way that the 7 of us retired Forest Service employees who have accumulated 140 years on the Police Ranger District in our careers, and we actually became aware of it. I became aware of it when I received an anonymous letter from a district employee who was very concerned about the exchange. And I'd like to read a paragraph or two from a letter which she wrote to the forest supervisor, Tom Riley at the time, and the regional forester, Mr. Tidwell, Tom Tidwell, who is now the chief of the Forest Service. A copy of this letter was sent to Mr. Tidwell, and this is the way this employee felt concerning the Upper Lochsa exchange. I'll read a couple of paragraphs. First, as an employee of this district, that's the Police Ranger District, I'm frustrated by the steamroller pace this project has taken on. When I think about all of the hard work, time, and effort previous and current employees have put in on the district on every acre, it humbles me to be part of such a proud management tradition. All of these people, past and present employees and volunteers, take ownership in their activities on this ground that we hold and manage in the public trust. I personally value the Palouse for its multiple use aspects within the resource management spectrum. To have people who have no connection with the ground put it unceremoniously on the chopping block with coerced and then ignored district input not only frustrates me, but angers me, because it seems to me that we are the prime stakeholders in this discussion, and the input that comes from this office, that's the Palouse office, should be valued. And it's comments like that that throughout my career with the Forest Service mirror the people I worked with and for, as far as our concern for the land and concern particularly for the Police Ranger District. It's a very special place. It's very productive. It's used by 100,000 people in the vicinities of Moscow, Pullman, little towns of Princeton, Deary, Beauville, Elk River. It's part of multiple use management of a resource that is really, truly multiple use. So that's the way I got involved in it. When I read this letter in its entirety, I felt that some of the things that we had predicted in the past, through past exchanges that have occurred on the Palouse District and the Clearwater National Forest, I just felt that the Palouse District was on the chopping block to be traded away, exchanged for checkerboard lands such as the Upper Lochsa and all the checkerboard lands that exist on the St. Joe Ranger District, St. Mary's Ranger District. It used to be the St. Joe National Forest. So that stirred us up, and when I notified other colleagues that had retired and what I had worked with, they became stirred up as well. And that's kind of the way we got involved in this. So some of the things that we'll share here today with Kathy and I, most can be confirmed by various documents that we have, letters, emails. This isn't something that I feel you should take and say, okay, we'll bring these people to court on this. It's so a lot of it is our thoughts as to what goes in, what this exchange means. And I think we'll take it from there. Kathy, how did you get involved in this thing? I know there were some articles in the papers that came out that Dave Johnson had in the Lewiston Trib, and I just wanted to know, friends of the Merriman Irvin McCroskey State Park, or what have you? How did you get involved?
Actually, I had one of the local loggers tell me that there's going to be a meeting about an exchange that they wanted to exchange out some of the land in the Police Ranger District. And so we went to the meeting and were absolutely appalled to find out that the Forest Service would trade off land of this extreme value and land that my family's hunted on forever, and my husband's family and all of his family, and it's been a way of life for the whole family. So after going to this meeting and finding out this was true and this was going to take place, I made a whole lot of phone calls and told people what was going on, and we decided to form a group, Friends of the Police Ranger District, and let the public be aware of what was going on, because the Forest Service has totally neglected to tell the public. So the public is unaware of what was really happening and that they were going to lose these lands, and so we started that group and are just trying to let the public know all the information we can. And so we're gonna show you a map here, and John's gonna explain a little bit and show you where the upper Lochsa land is that's been clear cut and is going to cost the public an enormous amount of money for restoration, and show you some of that. So what do you think, John? You want to show them our maps here? And
well, we're ad-libbing this, so it's not written out, and there'll be a lot of things that aren't in order, but we'll do our best to give our ideas of what happened. Kathy, I did want to ask, was that meeting you attended the first public meeting, or was it the second one in which a large group had gathered in Moscow?
Actually, the one that we went to was a meeting from McCroskey State Park. It wasn't just for the upper Lochsa at all. It just turned out that Representative Andrew Hawes was going to be at it.
Representative of WPT.
Yeah, representing Western Pacific Timber, of which we have learned that they are not the ones that purchased this land. The company that purchased this land is TWJ Holdings, and was then transferred or sold, or however they did it, into Western Pacific Timber, both of which are owned by Tim Blickseth and James Dolan, as a matter of record, from Idaho Secretary of State. And what we felt is that this was extreme deception of the public, because it was called TWJ Holdings, and by putting it as a name of Western Pacific Timber, we felt that was deceiving the public and believing that they are truly a timber company, when we have researched and they're not a member of the Sustained Forestry Group. And all the other logging companies we've checked into, they are. And Western Pacific Timber is not. And to our knowledge, we haven't been able to find any timber industrial work that they have done within the state of Idaho. So we feel it's in name only, basically.
I think one of the things that, and this is just something that in my mind was developed, that Western Pacific Timber a timber company had to become involved, because the way I understand land exchanges, it's supposed to be like lands for like lands. And therefore, a timber company would be the most likely person to engage in the exchange. I'd like to kind of give a little background on exchanges a bit, and that's kind of why this map is up here. I think we understand exchanges by looking back. And one of the things on land exchanges that has bothered me on the Palouse and the Clearwater, and I'm sure it's for other places, other states as well, is the fact that the Forest Service always gives the impression that this is like lands for like lands, value for value, dollar for dollar. But the public is never privy to the appraisal that is made when the draft environmental impact statement comes out. And even when the final comes out, the appraisal is not in the final. So you never know whether this is really true. Now in this case, in previous cases, let me say, two previous cases, one which occurred on the Palouse district about 1994, it was finalized, was called the McGarry-Johnson exchange, or the Johnson-McGarry-Butte exchange. And it was relatively 1,993 acres for about 4,300 acres of developed national forest land for 1,993 acres of undeveloped private timberland. This happened to be with the Potlatch Corporation in the Elk River area. I would cover that at a later subject, but anyway, that's one of the things that got me interested in land exchanges. The next one was the Beaver Cedar Exchange, and it involved a solid block of national forest ownership. These two maps up here show that. This was a solid block of about 16,000 acres of national forest ownership, and this is the Beaver block. It's about an hour out of Orfino. And there's a blacktop road that comes beyond it. How did this block, you can see the National Forest line runs right through here, the Clearwater National Forest line, and this block sits out by itself. It's important to realize how this land was acquired. And that's back around the turn of the century, 1906 or so. Congress came up with something called the Forest Homestead Act. And essentially this said if forest land could be shown better developed as agricultural land, that then a homestead could take place. You could have a homestead. So Big Timber decided that they wanted this land, which was very rich in big timber, white pine and great cedar at the time. And so they would find a person who would go into 160 acres. They would help clear maybe 5 acres, build a little cabin, and then they would buy the land, reportedly for $1, the 160 acres, in exchange for giving this person a full-time job at the mill. Well, after these lands had been taken of the prime timber that the company at that time wanted, then they decided in the 30s, why should I pay taxes on this land? And they turned it over to the feds, and the Forest Service began to manage this land for multiple use purposes in the late 50s and early 60s, and really turn it into something that was beautiful, multiple use lands. So now, here we come to the 1990s, and here's a piece of checkerboard land up here in the upper North Fork of the Clearwater, and it's called the Cedars area. And this is the area here on this fire map, large fire occurrence map. These two areas coincide. And that land was owned by DAW and had been severely cut over, quite a bit of it, the easily accessible stuff, by DAW. The land was purchased.
John, who's DAW?
I don't know. It's a logging company. I don't know what the acronym stands for, but they were active, and they had logged this much in the same way that the land was logged. on the Lochsa exchange checkerboard stuff. And Potlatch Corporation bought this with the idea of exchanging this land for this land. Now, there wasn't enough standing sawlog volume up here to get the whole 16,000 acres. This was 28,000 acres, this was 16,000 acres, but there wasn't enough sawlog volume, so they only got about 14,200 and some acres in that exchange. And then there were preceding exchanges that following exchanges that acquired the whole 16,000 acres. What has been done on these lands since they've been acquired by the Forest Service, as near as I can figure, the predominant work has been to remove roads. And
So is there any trees on those parcels now?
well, there's something like 95 million board feet of timber was cruised, and that was cruised into 14,300 some acres down here for the exchange to make it equal value for equal value. And you have to see the appraisal, Kathy, to understand what equal value dollar for dollar means. For instance, down here we had roads that were beautifully designed and engineered, often rocked. The land was accessible by a asphalt road, as you know.
Right.
And there was millions of dollars invested in burning the slash after an area was logged, in planting to conifers, in thinning those, in pruning, and sometimes in gopher control. So you had a huge investment by the Forest Service for the public in these lands down here.
So that was all invested with taxpayer money.
Right, that was invested
So-
with taxpayer money. So when the appraisal comes along, the Forest Service always says an independent appraiser will determine the value. Well, what is given the independent appraiser is the sawlog volume. So if these plantations and all the money invested in this area was not cruisable sawlog volume, you got raw land value for it.
So basically, we had a Cadillac here, invested for the public, and we traded for a Volkswagen.
Yes, but it wasn't that of course, it wasn't seen by the public that way. I like to use an analogy that you go to an appraiser who appraises, and you say, you've got two rings. One, both got gold. This one on the backside has a diamond. You go to an appraiser and you say, please appraise the gold in here. He doesn't know about the diamond here. Only the information that you give the appraiser is what he bases the independent appraisal on. So the only information that appeared in this unit and in the McGarry-Johnson exchange that was on the Palouse, the only information is sawlog volume, what kind of yarding system is needed to yard that to a landing, how far to the nearest mill, and raw land value. That's what the appraisal, that's what the public has been duped into thinking is dollar for dollar, value for value, which is the very start of the Upper Lochsa Exchange. That's what.
So at the Upper
Supervisor Ryan.
Lochsa Exchange, all that land up there has been clear cut, and the only trees still standing for the most part are just the buffer zones along the creeks.
Well,
Will
no,
those be counted as saw log?
no, yes, I don't know. I don't believe, I can't say for certain whether they would be counted as sawlog volume, but in some photos that we can look at later on of this country, there's some of it that was so high and rugged that building roads to access it, to get out the timber, just didn't pay. In other words, Plum Creek, when they owned this, they made sure that they took the stuff that was economically feasible to get, plus leaving a few stems per acre, maybe 5,000 board feet per acre, to help regenerate the stand. Often, the stand that was regenerated was underneath a cumulative amount of slash.
So with all that slash, if lightning hit that slash, it will just burn up all those new trees, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So the public will end up with nothing but bare ground.
Well, in many cases, that's what's been described as a public, that the Forest Service wants to manage these areas for, is to let fire play its role. So, in other words, we're managing the landscape.
Won't that cause like extreme amounts of pollutants into the air and stuff if that all starts to burn?
Well, sure, and it will, but you know, it's out of sight, out of mind. And here's the other thing about this, that why I feel this area and this area are important to for the Forest Service to get a hold of and fit right in with our politicians' desire to appease the timber industry and get money for their campaigns and this kind of thing. I think it fits right in. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, Kathy, but it was something that we picked up from a concerned public that shows something the UN and the U.S. has put together. I don't want to go into detail because I don't know that much about it, but essentially these are wildlife corridors that extend from Yellowstone, over here is Yellowstone National Park, up to the Canadian line and on down to Mexico. And there are several things that seems to fit in with this pattern of desiring to acquire these lands while giving out lands on the Palouse and the western side of the old St. Joe, giving those up in exchange to make this wildlife corridor a reality. Here's a thought on this. Down here, this is the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness Area, an arm of it that comes up here. Below that is the Frank Church River Mill Return, an extensive wilderness area.
Right.
If these lands were acquired and the roads were closed, you would have a continuation of that roadless area to the Great Burn area. And this is one that the people have been trying to get, the environmentalists have been trying to get for quite a while, declared wilderness. Then you go up to this checkerboard stuff in which the Clearwater has done nothing to dispose of 3,000 acres of slash that was there, that area that needed to be replanted. They've hauled no timber, had no timber sales up there. You could go from that to the Pioneer area on the St. Joe, Old St. Mary's District, Old St. Joe National Forest, and you go on up. Now, in the spring of 2009, there was 111,000 acres of checkerboard lands on the Montana side of this line that was purchased from Plum Creek by the Nature Conservancy for about $225 million. Much of it was cut over land.
So how did Plum Creek acquire this land?
This land here was acquired as railroads were being built through the Midwest, and Congress had determined that for every mile of railroad that was built, a section of land would be given to the timber, to the railroad companies. And they decided, as they went through the Plain States, the way I understand it, why do we want a section of land here when we can get a section of land anywhere? So they came out and picked up these lands. So up north, when you get on the St. Joe, the old Milwaukee Railroad owned the checkerboard stuff. And then these lands, are sold and timber companies and back and forth and this kind of stuff until finally Plum Creek acquired this land, DAW acquired that land, Potlatch acquired some lands up here, and in the early 1990s, there was a lot of this land being bought by different outfits. And I think now, I can't confirm this of course, that when Potlatch was able to exchange that land for this land down here, this solid, beautiful managed land with lots of timber and lots of multiple use, and an hour from Orfino on an asphalt road, when they saw that, these things started being snatched up by different people whose is so intertwined I can't tell you who was really buying the land, what entity.
Right.
But I do know that there's a very large, that Potlatch Corporation has become a real estate investment trust, that they've acquired a lot of land in northern Idaho, as you can see on the map. And of course they acquired this land down here for this land up here. And now there's a connection between this and the current Upper Lochsa land exchange, as far as I'm concerned. That's very
This land exchange looks very similar to the Beaver Cedar land exchange, which the public ended up with basically land that's of no value because it's not multi-purpose use.
Well, it's not like lands for like lands, is what you're saying. It's,
Right, yeah.
And it's far from the population center, and it fits into this wildlife corridor business that shows here. When the public, the general public, has no conception of this, but if you talk to folks in the Forest Service that are in much higher positions than I ever attained, or many of the people working on district level don't know about. You talk to those folks, they know about it, but it's not public. It's not public.
Isn't that something they should be telling the public, because the public pays the Forest Service's wages. All the employees are paid for by the public.
Well, of course, but
and the public owns the land.
Yeah, the public should be involved in all of this stuff from the very beginning. They kind of anyway. That's kind of a preview of going into the Upper Lochsa exchange and looking at that in some detail. But you have to look back to see what happened on these exchanges. Now, this is an interesting thing here, and I think it's reflected in the selection of lands on the Palouse district, is reflected by this and a letter that I have in my files from a fellow by the name of Jerry, I can't remember Jerry's last name, Branning, Jerry Branning. I think he lives in Orfino. And this letter was written in 1993 when this exchange was taking place. And he says, a good example of my concern and a rather ironic feature of this proposal is exemplified by sections 10 and 14 of Township 40 North 1 East, two sections under consideration for this trade. These two sections were under federal ownership in the 70s. Access was developed and initial harvest activities, including site preparation and reforestation, were accomplished. A land exchange was then undertaken, resulting in federal ownership of remote Great Burn affected sections east and south of Wapato Peak. In here, in other words, in this, what they call the Great Burn area. They exchanged these developed lands for this, and that's why you don't see the checkerboard pattern there. It was exchanged. And so these sections obtained by the Forest Service were probably characterized by small diameter, low lodgepole pine or seral brush fields, while those given up, these areas here, contained high value old growth timber with only limited post-harvest. And so when they were exchanged to DAW, then DAW went in and they clear cut it. It took all the stuff that had been left for multiple use purposes, like old growth and this, and size of openings and this kind of stuff. All your burning and planting that had been done, no consideration given in the appraisal process for what was done on behalf of the public, what was expended on behalf of the public. It's similar to the beaver block, because that was all under management, and now, and when Potlatch got it, right in the environmental impact statement, they say, if we get that within 10 years, we will have harvested 80 million board feet of timber. That was an underestimate, I'm sure, but it was agreed to. I mean, that was their upright plan. They've harvested much more. They've clear cut it. There was 900 and some acres of old growth in here, and it was given the same. There wasn't.
So was the old growth cut too?
Oh yes, it's sawlog volume. When in the exchange, it is nothing but sawlog volume. The 300 foot of riparian area, you leave 300 foot of timber on each side of a fish-bearing stream, whether it's an anadromous stream or in fish. 300 feet, so you've got 600 feet left on national forest land along each side of the stream. And that essentially goes for sawlog volume, except they will consider, okay, the best management practices in the state of Idaho require much less.
Do you know how much, do you know what the footage is under?
I think it's 75% shade has to be left along the riparian areas. Of course, I spent my career in fire behavior, and I was on a national incident management team for 23 years as a fire behavior analyst. And I can tell you that when fire burns in these areas and in the wilderness areas, and it burns the hottest in these riparian areas. Why? Because there's more fuel there. Trees are fuel on a large fire.
Right.
And then in these wilderness areas, I've seen tremendous erosion when hydrophobic conditions of the soil, and you get a rain on there, and it just takes the topsoil clear out.
So in the upper Lochsa, with all the slash that's laying up there, and that burns, will it destroy the soil that's there and cause erosions up there that the taxpayers will end up having to repair?
It can,
is that part of what they're calling restoration?
It can very much restore, yeah. The word restoration really gets to me because fire is cyclic in the Intermountain West. So what part are you restoring? Are you restoring the timber or the brush? And of course, when you don't manage when fire goes on the landscape, nature manages it, and nature can be very, very harsh. And a typical example of that took place somewhere in this area here, the Toboggan area, on what was called the Pleasant Fire in 2003. It happened on the Powell district. And I have pictures showing tremendous erosion that occurred from that wildfire, which was allowed to burn within a certain confine. So when you have this kind of area, anywhere where fire can play its natural role, you do not have control of when the rains occur. And when they occur can be, I guess the best thing I can do is give an example from my career on a fire called the North Hills Fire, which occurred just north of Helena, Montana. You could see it from the Capitol building. It started outside of the wilderness area, the Gates of the Mountains wilderness. It burned across the Missouri River, jumped up into the Gates of the Mountains wilderness area, burning some areas near some development up a creek called Beaver Creek. And during the course of that fire, we got what was called a 100-year rain event. Now to get a 100-year rain event, you have to remember that you're east of the Continental Divide when you're in that area. A 100-year rain event was 3/4 of an inch of rain in less than an hour. That doesn't sound like much. But because the soils were hydrophobic, that is, the water couldn't penetrate down to the soil, kind of like glass over on the top. Anyway, erosion started right at the top of the ridges in the gates of the mountain wilderness, and by the time it got down to what were creek bottoms at one time, I mean, the topography was such that the person that lived there said they had not seen water in those creeks in the 80 years that they lived there, in those valleys channeled down. The slurry, the topsoil that was coming through that area was 8 to 10 feet deep, and bringing boulders as big as your Volkswagen, and trees and everything. The roots that were exposed, that's the most precious thing we have, is the topsoil. It takes centuries to form topsoil. And that's the same thing that happened on the Pleasant Fire in 2003. Your topsoil is gone. It takes a long time for nature to recover. And so anyway, that's just an example of letting fire play its natural role in these areas. But one of these articles here is John McCarthy of the Wilderness Society, and he's down in Boise. I think it's right there, John McCarthy. He talks about there are different ways to make wilderness besides legislation. This is one of the ways, right here. You take out the roads.
So there's no access to them once the roads are removed.
No road access.
So they're cutting the public out from their own land.
Well, the public that uses roads, would be cut out. So you can essentially make wilderness without declaring it. You already have wilderness here. You have a pioneer area up here. When the Forest Service gets this 111,000 acres of checkerboard land along here, shoot, they don't have enough money to manage their own roads now. You read about that all the time. The thousands of miles of roads on National Forest land. That'll be closed.
And currently,
roadless area.
Currently, the public through the Forest Service owns 110 million acres, is what I read.
Well, I don't know how much, I can't stay up on that because it changes so rapidly, but we just, anyway, here, that's kind of the situation that we see developing if this land is exchanged for isolated, difficult to manage land on the Palouse and the Nez Perce. And that kind of brings us up to my other thoughts about this land exchange.
Yeah, some of the lands that are right on Highway 41 in northern Idaho are within 2 miles of town.
Yeah, there are other exchanges.
And they call them isolated. They're not isolated. Very, very few parcels are isolated at all.
It brings me to the thoughts that I've had about land exchanges. I think everything that is done legally, according to law. But you uncovered a GAO
Yes.
Examination of land exchanges or investigation of land exchanges, and they were made some very what do you say, pointed remarks or
Yes. Yeah.
About what should be changed.
Yeah, government accounting office report.
Yeah. And that was 10 years ago, and nothing's been done. Does that surprise you?
No.
Doesn't surprise me, because where do these exchanges start? I go back to an old axiom that a friend of mine, Ed Heilman, retired aviation and fire management and aviation on the regional office. He had 10 axioms when he retired, Kathy. And the first axiom was, all big decisions are political. And land exchanges makes me a believer of his axiom, because when you have millions of dollars involved like this, it starts at the very top. And that's with our elected officials in the Washington office.
Yeah, we've tried repeatedly to ask Mike Crapo and Rish and Minnick how they feel about this land exchange and if they're going to support the people, because the majority of the people do not want this land exchange, and they repeatedly refuse to back the people.
So let's discuss a little detail about the land exchange. You want to do that? The Upper Lochsa Exchange, as far as the Palouse District is concerned. Hey, let's look at some timelines related to the Lochsa Exchange that I put together, and I know you could fill in a lot of places because you gals on the fringe of the Palouse.
Let's hold that.